What's up, guys? Welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your host, Zach, and today's subreddit is r/NuclearRevenge.
This story's called Guns, Drugs, and an Overreaction. Intro. This took place about 9 to 10 years ago after a work-related back injury. I was on workers' comp and had a ton of free time and severe back pain. I decided to give marijuana a try for the first time in several years. I live in California and it was legal to use pot here with a doctor's recommendation. Right before all of this, I moved into a cheap little apartment in a not-so-great part of the city. I was naive and didn't realize that I was surrounded by meth addicts. I'm a musician and one of my neighbors was a fellow guitarist, Tim. We bonded pretty quickly over music and smoking pot. Things were going fine with my new place until our landlord, Cindy, got into a huge blowout with Tim over their illegal weed growing operation. Those idiots were growing hundreds of plants in the empty units without any permits or the consent of the owner. I don't know what really happened between them because the stories kept changing, but the fight was basically over money. Cindy was a woman in her 50s, but turned into a junior high school bully and set out to turn everyone against Tim. She first tried to get me on her side by giving me copious amounts of pot. When that didn't work, she started vandalizing my property and framed Tim for it. I became furious at him and confronted him about what was happening. We got into a huge shouting match and he called me, someone who has never used a drug in her life, unless you count pot, a meth head. His insult was especially ridiculous because he was an active meth user. After that incident, Tim would bang on my front door at all hours of the night, would yell racist slurs and insults at me, and even tried to kick my puppy. The final straw was when he ran up to me while I was outside and threw a huge bucket of hot water on me, my puppy, and my freaking phone. My dog was fine, and after placing my phone in a bag of uncooked rice, it was fine too. I, on the other hand, was beyond livid. The revenge. I talked to a friend, Chris, about what was going on at my place, and he concocted a plan. Since Cindy wanted me on her side, she gave me lots of information about Tim, including his cell number, which I gave to Chris. He started calling Tim several times a day. Chris would also start parking his car in visible places near the apartment complex. I began talking to the other neighbors and fed them information about mysterious cars and people watching the apartment complex. I knew the info would get back to Tim without me having to do very much. Tim became more and more paranoid and got to the point that he finally asked me, of all people, if I had noticed anything strange. I told him I had been seeing a strange car nearby with people just watching his apartment. He tried to give me a half-booty apology and asked me to let him know if I saw anything else. As a good neighbor, of course I agreed. He said he didn't know if it was the cops or a gang following and watching him. I shrugged as if I didn't know. After 2 weeks of Chris volunteering his free time to help me with my revenge, it all came to a head. One day, Tim hopped into his car and started driving. I was on the phone with Chris as he gave me the play-by-play. Tim tried to lose Chris by turning into a grocery store parking lot down the street. Chris jumped out of his car and fired a gun into the air several times and all hell broke loose. I had no idea he even carried a gun. Chris then chased Tim a few miles down the road until I was finally able to get him to stop and go home. I was worried he'd be arrested, so I called everything off. But it didn't matter at that point. Tim was now convinced that they were trying to kill him or somehow steal his pot-growing operation. A couple of days later, Cindy asked if I was interested in moving into Tim's apartment, which was slightly bigger than mine. I asked what was going on and she told me that Tim was moving out of state and that she was getting rid of their growing operation ASAP. By this time, I found out that she had been responsible for starting the fight between Tim and I. I was already looking for another place to live, so I declined and instead found the phone numbers for the complex owner and his son. I told them everything about the grow rooms. I also called the power company to let them know about the illegal power usage for the empty units. I'm not sure what happened with the power company, but when I called to inquire about an available apartment a few months later, I found out that the new landlord was one of my old neighbors. Cindy still lived in the complex, but was no longer in charge. My ending. I settled my workers' comp case a few weeks later and moved on. Although this was a very turbulent but short time in my life, it taught me many valuable lessons. Wow, This Redditor took everyone down. Cindy, Tim, I guess that's it, but still, that was both people. Would I say this is nuclear? Probably not, more like pro-revenge, but still pretty good. This story's called Screw Over Your Employees. Don't be too shocked when your dirty laundry starts catching up to you. So I need to keep this somewhat vague to maintain anonymity. And I wasn't there for all of it. This mostly happened to my friend, who was one of the employees screwed over. But I did what I could to help my friend get revenge. Friend of mine was employed as a barista for a coffee shop with a couple of locations. Well, the owner turned out to be a grade A scumbag. Started paying the employees with bad checks, not giving them their tips if they were paid on credit card. Obviously, he couldn't steal their cash tips, not that he didn't try. Things along those lines. He was, of course, stealing from the business to fund his own lavish lifestyle. My friend was angry and quit shortly after this nonsense started. And of course, the business shortly went under. But if that's all that happened, this wouldn't fit in NuclearRevenge. Now, my friend was out a few $1,000s. I'm not sure exactly how much, but enough that it was a serious hit to their budget. And they weren't the only ones. This creep was the classic con man, writing checks to cover the bad checks, all the delay tactics you ever see. Oh, the bank must have messed up, just redeposit it. And of course it comes back as a bad check a week or two later. Lots of shady stuff, but he was a good con man. All told, 8 people were getting screwed over to, I found out later, in excess of $20,000. So one afternoon, my friend is telling me this story, how he's so sick and tired of being conned by this creep, as well as everyone else. And here is where the NuclearRevenge part comes into effect. I start digging into the business owner, all public record stuff, and some of it I learned from my friend or their coworkers. But started to learn a lot about this scumbag. He's got multiple felonies in his past. I'm all for giving people a second chance, but this guy wasn't that old, and had racked up easily a half-dozen felonies. Why he wasn't still in jail is a topic for a much different forum. One of his convictions was being a felon in possession of a firearm. He was currently on probation for the above conviction. This is where things start getting interesting. A little more light digging and I come up with the name of his probation officer. When I sat and talked to my friend about what I had found out about his prior employer, 2 cycles of bounced checks was enough. He happened to mention that he had seen firearms in his apartment. They'd hung out together socially before things went completely pear-shaped. He'd used his girlfriend to purchase firearms since he was a prohibited person. Straw purchase, yet another felony. So now things get really interesting. I put my friend in contact with Scumbag's probation officer. Turns out, when you are out on probation, there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do. One of them is commit more felonies. This is an automatic revocation of your probation and will land your happy little butt back in jail. Oh, and knowingly passing bad checks in our state for the amount he was writing them for is a felony in and of itself. 8 employees, 3 payroll cycles before the business officially went belly up, 23 felony counts of passing a bad check, since my buddy bailed at 2 cycles, repeat offense of being a felon in possession of a firearm. As if that's not bad enough, when his probation officer came a knocking to check on these allegations, he also found drug paraphernalia and drugs sufficient to get him for possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Multiple different drugs. So multiple counts of that too. For those keeping score at home, if he was convicted of all these counts, he would be looking at roughly an additional 30 felonies. Easily enough to keep him in jail for a very long time. Now, if this were petty revenge, that's where things would have stopped. But no. You see, the state has this fund that all employers pay a tax into. It's a fund for those situations where the company goes out of business, writes bad checks for their employees, etc. And it's administered by the state labor board. So they pay out to cover the lost wages, but not the lost tips, of the employees. But the state is not benevolent in this. Oh no. You see, in order to attempt to recoup their losses, they can seize company assets. And in the case of a poorly set up company with no separation of assets between the company and the owner, they can also seize personal assets. Oh yes, that shiny new company truck? that you're towing your shiny new boat with? Guess what, scumbag? They now belong to the state. Your bank accounts? Yep, those belong to the state now too. Now, surely you must be thinking, surely this is now pro-revenge, right? Oh no. You see, this scumbag messed with my friend, and I don't take kindly to that kind of nonsense. You see, my friend learned throughout this process that on top of all this, his employer was committing tax fraud/evasion. As far as the employees were concerned, they were all straight up W-4 employees, meaning he was withholding the correct taxes, payroll taxes, Medicare taxes, etc. Except he was reporting to the IRS that all of his employees were independent contractors and wasn't actually withholding any taxes at all. Taxes for the company? He was fudging those so badly they should have been sold as brownies. Unfortunately for Scumbag, a friend of a friend happened to work for the local IRS office, and after sitting with him over drinks one evening, found out that the IRS has a tip line for reporting tax evasion. And depending on how it's reported, well, turns out that the person reporting the tax evasion may actually get a small percentage as reward for turning in the tax sheet. So, on top of facing 30-some-odd felony charges, on top of having all his personal and company assets seized, Scumbag now has the IRS chasing after him. That, dear readers, is NuclearRevenge. I will update this as more developments come in. I can say that because this scumbag is such a scumbag, he is currently sitting in jail awaiting trial for domestic assault on his girlfriend. My friend and his coworkers have been interviewed by local police and the probation officer, as well as the IRS and the ATF, for the straw purchases of the firearms through his girlfriend. My understanding is she's made a deal with the ATF to avoid charges for the straw purchases in exchange for her testimony against him. The district attorney and probation officer are waiting for him to be sentenced on the domestic violence charges before they go after him for all the other stuff. That way, he has to serve the sentences consecutively. As far as the federal charges, who knows when those will be filed. But my understanding is that no matter when he's charged, he'll have to serve the federal time after his state prison time, and won't get any credit for the time served in the state pen. Man, you gotta love when the dominoes start falling in these stories. They are so beautifully written at times. Gosh, they build it up so well, and then they just rack on all the ways they're just destroying this horrible person's life. That is so satisfying. Let me know in the comments below if you agree. This story's called "My Teacher Flooded His Neighbor's House with Sewage so his house wouldn't be flooded with sewage." So this is a story my carpentry teacher told us the other day. So my teacher lives in a 3-story house, not including the basement, and up the street is some condos. In one of those condos is a family with children. One day, my teacher's wife goes into their basement to do laundry. She smelled dirty diapers. I guess dirty diapers have a distinct smell. She recognized this isn't normal and called my teacher, explaining that it smells like dirty diapers. Their kids are all grown up, so it obviously wasn't coming from them. My teacher thought about it and speculated someone up the street was flushing dirty diapers down their toilet. She said to his wife, "Don't flush the toilet, don't use the washer, don't use the sink." He proceeds to call the person that put in the sewer system of his house. They're friends, so he was willing to help him out. What the guy told him to do was plug every drain in his house with some sort of drain plug they sell at home improvement stores for this kind of reason. He even had to take his toilets off and plug the drain on them, all except for his 3rd floor. Wait for it. Once he did that, according to his friend's instructions, go to the 3rd floor and flush every toilet. He said when he did this, it was so clogged up in the pipes, water started to come from the drain of his bathroom and he had to plug it up. Nothing was happening until he heard this giant whoosh noise in his pipes. A couple minutes later, fire trucks were showing up to the condos up the street and he knew it worked. The reason why this happened was since his dumb booty neighbors were flushing diapers down the toilet, the way the sewer system works is that it goes down the stream of elevation. So, coming from the condos down the street, then it comes off at an intersection and goes to his house. The diapers were caught at the intersection and actually going into his house. Just the pipes luckily, unless they didn't take the right action. So, by plugging all of the drains except the 3rd floor, the liquid would need more pressure to travel up to the 3rd floor, or by flushing all of the toilets and introducing a lot of pressure into the system. Because it's at a higher elevation on the 3rd floor, it shot all the clogged up sewage back upstream. Even though it's going upstream, remember, pressure. All of these drains were plugged, including the sewage system going down the street. So there's only one way to go, to the neighbor's house and into their house. Oh no, my butt fell off. That's why you don't flush diapers down the toilet. They expand. Actually, don't flush anything other than what should go down there, or your house could be covered in crap next time because your neighbor knows what he/she's doing. Oh my. That's... Oh no. I don't know how to feel about this. Okay, this is a fantastic story, okay? But like, what if the condo people didn't know any better? You could have just told them not flood their house with sewage. Wow!
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.